95% on Rotten Tomatoes, 7.5 on IMDb, Critics' Choice Movie Award. Oh, sorry.
For Best Sci-Fi Horror Film, Saturn Awards, Best Writing, and Best Horror. AFI Awards Movie of the Year, DFCS Awards, Best Science Fiction Horror Film, Golden Roses Best Horror Movie of the Year, Golden Trailers Best Horror.
Oh, I'm out of breath. So, is it worth the hype? Isn't the question here. The real question is, why did she get pregnant? Before I get into why this movie is crazy overrated, let me give you a quick rundown of the movie. Picture this, in 2020, a family. Dad, mom, 3 kids, oops, scratch that. 2 kids, and a bump. Left in a post-apocalyptic world infested with these cute little noise-sensitive creatures. Shh! Shut up! To survive, they must not make a sound. Let's talk about what the movie does well. Cinematography? Stunning. There's no denying that this is a visually appealing film. The lighting and symbolism? Top notch. Just take a look at these scenes, for example. This is an example of a similar scene to begin with and to end with. In the beginning, we see Lee working on radio channels. The basement that is damp and dark, as if the situation they're in right now is dire and bleak. However, there are windows of hope, and it all kindles from his attempt. Key light is shining through the small frames. The basement here is seen as the thinking space that generates ideas and solutions for their current situation. It is therefore the only thing that connects the family most to a brighter future. The use of technologically advanced sound design, or lack thereof, captures the essence of the story really well and creates intense suspense. Not to mention the great CGI effect that the team obviously had a budget for. Let's talk about disability in the movie. A Quiet Place is an example that non-disabled actors need not portray a role with disability, especially when in most horror movies, disability is linked with evil. So this is one plus about The Quiet Place in terms of representation. Overall, looks like a fun, family-friendly movie, right? But if you strip all of that down, what do you have left? A Quiet Place digs more plot holes than graves. So you have your typical type of storytelling, exposition, rising action, climax, and resolution. Pretty straightforward. At this point, the film just relies on its gimmick to be interesting. You see, there are 2 ends of a writing spectrum, the plot-driven type to the character-driven type. Character-driven writing is jumping into the maze of the character's brain, plucking out what they like, seeing them weigh the good and bad decisions, whether they've developed at all, and how that molds the story. But beware, characters have the power to make the plot really good or really bad. On the other hand, plot-driven stories put a pause on the quest to develop even deeper characters, and instead turn phases to propel and develop the plot further in terms of external conflict, twists, and action. Plot-driven stories are commonly found in what's known as commercial fiction, such as mystery, crime, romance, and fantasy genres, where we know that in the end, the murder will be solved, the guy will get the girl, or the prince will inherit his kingdom. Most of the time, characters' decisions do not come off as organic, mainly because the plot wants them to move the story, and the decision is not based on their personalities and their characteristics. A Quiet Place tries to strike a balance between plot-driven and character-driven story, but it definitely lays heavier on the plot-driven side. We have the external conflict of the plot here that drives the whole story, but that does leave many plot holes to be answered. Where did these monsters come from? What is the purpose of killing humans when they don't even eat them? Little information is given, which makes this feel like a gimmick and a flat characterization of the aliens. And survivors? Are there any other than this family? What happens when every human dies? Where do the monsters go? And how are they living quietly at the house? Didn't the generator or something make sound? They had running water. And trampling leaves as they walked? Doesn't that count as sound since the creatures are so noise sensitive? Plot-driven stories also produce forgettable characters. Except for the deaf girl, of course. Other than her, are you able to recognize anyone else? Mom acts very mom. Dad is every dad ever. And kids, well, just kids. It's hard to make emotional connections with characters that aren't at all unique. Just typical white Americans. Style over substance leads to a lot of questionable decisions made by the characters. Having a baby, no protection? Is it intentional? Why? This is an example of an inorganic decision. Sure, it makes the story more interesting, but in terms of storytelling and a good character development, I'd give this an F. Letting the kids trail behind them? It's very uncharacteristic of the parents to leave the children behind in this life or death situation. This decision is obviously made by the writers to create drama and move the plot forward. It is not at all based on realism. The nail, another gimmick. A staircase that you walk on every day? Why can't you see it? And what is the nail nailing to? Empty plank of wood? Again, for the sake of suspense, the movie is willing to sacrifice its logic. And how do the monsters distinguish what sound sources to go to? Since they are natural sounds and man-made sounds, wouldn't they be running back and forth at every little sound made? It's not like the humans are speaking that sets apart their voice frequency. And if we are speaking of noises, the dad ran towards the kid. Why didn't he get mauled as well? And the water leak and flood in the basement. In a quiet place, can't you hear the sound loud and clear? It's time for horror movie tropes. A pregnant lady? Never seen that before in horror movies, have you?
윤서야! 우리 딸 이름 상원이야!
Want a moody teenager that screws everything up? We've got one for you. Here's where you see the internal conflict. Regan's guilt and her assuming that her father resented her leads to her rebelling. And they only kill the son so Regan could feel guilty, which leads her to rebel, and the father ultimately dies. Wow, one heck of an unnecessary circumstance. Adults sacrifice for children. Cornfields and aliens go together better than peanut butter and jelly. Even though the location can be set in other urban places, the creator insists on doing it the old-fashioned way, which can be seen as unoriginal. And the creatures, can you at least make them original? Yeah, they look like a parody of every horror movie ever. A Quiet Place has an interesting premise, but that is also its flaw. By relying too much on its gimmick and stylistic choices, it had to sacrifice some logic, and then fell on its face into a classic horror trope. I wouldn't say this was a bad movie or that you won't enjoy it. I just feel robbed that we only get to see a part of the movie where not many things make sense and are logically flawed. The movie tells us a lot through the uses of set dressing and mise-en-scène, but that information is redundant and needed no telling. Some plot holes that needed information instead are abandoned. The most interesting part? The aliens. We know so little of. If the writing was more detailed and fleshed out in this part, it definitely make the movie more riveting. This movie does not need a prequel or a sequel to tell us more exposition. It should be enjoyable and understandable on its own legs. A Quiet Place is good at creating suspense and makes you want to pee in your pants. But is this movie so outstanding and has amazing storytelling? I'd say not. Anyway, thanks for listening to the Cynical Rabbit's Rant. Peace!